Their families were not informed of their fate for several months, when they were given plastic bags handed with a few possessions. They were not told the location of the mass graves. They found out, of course, over the years, but they are still to this day forbidden to mourn their loved ones who lie together in these places of the damned. Now, this barbaric crime, the killing of prisoners, defenseless prisoners, has been a war crime for many centuries. But this crime was never investigated and never punished. Amnesty found out about it, a little of it. There was a UN rapporteur, a useless professor, who made a few casual inquiries and then let the matter hang. This was 1988, of course, the year when Saddam Hussein could bomb Halabja with poison gas, kill the Kurds, and the world would turn a blind eye. Well, the world turned a blind eye to this monstrous crime as well. And I don't know, is this what we're... Let there be light. Yes. The shining light. Many years later, of course, at a time it suited the United States, nemesis overtook Chemical Ali and other perpetrators of the poison gas in Iraq. But what has happened to the Iranian perpetrators of the prison massacres? The Ayatollah died from cancer a few months later after issuing another fatwa against Salman Rushdie. But the rest all seem to be living happily ever after, mostly in positions of even greater power than they held 25 years ago. I suppose there is this to be said: for Islamic diet and forced abstention from alcohol, it makes for a very long life. And some of them were very young at the time. But the death committee judges and the complicit politicians and prison officials and revolutionary guards who carried out the killings and tortures remain in high office, in a regime, of course, that is now committed to nuclear enrichment and eventually to the possession of nuclear arms. A regime which announced through its Chief Justice in 2009, when the Green Revolution protests began, that, I quote, "anyone resisting against the ruling system will be broken." And they were, with televised show trials, which had become such a feature in the 1980s. They were broken by torture, by bastinado, the whipping of the feet, by wire cables, which all the 1988 detainees suffered, a form of torture approved as tazir, religious punishment, and by execution as moharib. This goes on in Iran today. Moharib, the enemy of God. Tehran's even prison, the scene of mass murder in 1988, remains a brutal environment for young people picked up for attending demonstrations. And, of course, even for lawyers. Lawyers have become the particular target of the Iranian regime in the last 2 years. So, judging from the behavior over the last 30 years, Iran is not a regime that kills and tortures its enemy merely to stay in power. It kills them out of a conviction that God wants them dead. The 63rd chapter of the Holy Book, according to Khomeini's interpretation, says they're liable to earthly punishment as moharib. It was the claim of one of the leaders of the 1988 massacres that, I quote, "we execute to show our humanity." This particular brand of Shia millenarianism, the guardianship of the jurist, requires the state to act as directed by its mullahs to prepare the people for the Shia apocalypse, the re-emergence of the 12th imams, currently in some form of hiding or occultation. And it's necessary to remember that this state theology is constructed out of ancient battles where the 12th imam will destroy all his enemies when he returns, and so usher in peace and justice for the faithful if for no one else? Well, we've seen only too well how religious passions can inflame believers to fight, even to commit suicide and martyrdom operations. In Iran, the Ayatollah's acolytes encourage mutual aggression against the Maharibs of the earth. History teaches that regimes which act brutally to their own people are predisposed to invade or act aggressively towards other nations, and Iran is, as the 1988 massacres show, and as the promotion of those involved with them show, a brutal theocracy infused with the idea, and this is the awful thing about the massacres, that a state view that it is righteous to kill unbelievers. And of course, this is so relevant to the possibility of the potential possession of nuclear weapons, a state that is prepared to act, to kill innocent people because they've been in prison for years, they've done their sentence for demonstrating, but they don't accept the theology of the state, is the mullahs without mercy possessing nuclear power are frightening indeed. So what can be done now about this human rights atrocity? One of the worst, I suggest, that has come about in the last 50 years. International law has come a long way in that time. We now have Geneva Conventions that protect citizens in war, protect prisoners of war. We have a genocide convention, and it's notable that many of these people were killed because of their religious views. They had a different religious view to that of the state. We have the concept of the crime against humanity, which fits these facts perfectly. It was a dreadful crime against humanity, the killing of thousands of prisoners through a legal and a penal system ordered by the state. The UN let them down. It set up a special rapporteur who lost interest. Today, it would be possible for the Security Council to set up a special court, as they did with Lebanon, to investigate a prosecutor who could bring charges, but of course no one would be there to answer because the persons against whom the evidence lies, the perpetrators, all remain in high position in the state of Iran. The International Criminal Court can only deal with cases that come about, crimes committed after July 2002, so that's not a possibility. Other than this, one of the worst continuing crimes of this state is that it does not allow the thousands of relatives to mourn. It doesn't even allow them to know where their children are buried. Most of the victims were in their 20s, and they were buried in mass graves, and the state knows who is buried where, but it will not allow the parents to mourn in places which have been located and identified as mass graves. The parents who go there are generally dispersed, arrested, and not allowed to mourn. So that is a continuing crime that the ICC might investigate. But it is difficult, as we'll discuss during the afternoon, that international criminal law, while it's come a long way, has not come far enough to feel the collars of those who are responsible for one of the worst, if not the worst, single atrocity. Of course, there may come a day, as there's come a day in Libya, as there's come a day in Egypt, as there's come a day in Tunisia, where a new regime may be available to punish those crimes, and that is a possibility. But for the present, we must persuade the world to take some notice. The other crimes, Katyn has its feature film, the Japanese Death Marches has Alec Guinness in The Bridge Over the River Kwai. They have plenty of people know about them. This has been kept a secret through the work, through the cover-up by Iranian diplomats. There are one or two of those on the loose, and it may be that they could be prosecuted in America under the Alien Tort Claims Act or arrested and prosecuted under a universal jurisdiction. That is another possibility. There's apparently Rafsanjani, who, if you read my report, clearly played a very major part, an enormously brutal opportunist. He emerges from looking at the evidence of this time. Apparently he has a relative who's about to descend on Oxford University in very questionable circumstances. One would have thought that the greedy academics who sucked up to Saif Gaddafi at LSE have learnt their lesson. It's not a lesson, I hope, that Oxford University will have to learn as well. So there are these straws in the wind, but we must first promote knowledge of these awful events, and then perhaps piggyback on the concern of the world about these people who are capable of killing their own children, as murdering their own prisoners, obtaining nuclear power. It may be then that the Security Council will move on this atrocity, because the nuclear weapons in the hands of mullahs without mercy is surely an extension of the danger that perpetrators pose when they remain in power. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeffrey.